An eye for an eye and blood for blood. That should be the fundamental human law, right? But not in Joseon. Here, the rich and the noble trample the poor as if they are mere objects without feelings. There is no middle class. You are either rich or poor, or extremely poor. The poor, at least, have a house and manual labor to sustain them, while the extremely poor are crammed into a neglected, stinking part of the country. This is the humble story of Man-sik, the greatest merchant in the history of Joseon. Man-sik is the fourth son of the Minister of Punishment. His childhood was troubled and difficult because his mother was a concubine. He was neither noble nor of low birth. Though his mother often comforted him, assuring him of his nobility, he believed her only until he was around 5, 6, or 7. By the time he was 9, he noticed his half-brothers distancing themselves from him. He didn't understand why, and the more he tried to get close to them, the more they pulled away. When he reported this to his mother, she didn't let him finish before storming out of the room to confront his father. He followed her to his father's chamber, where guests were usually received. He heard his mother ask his father in a low, pained voice, "My lord, you promised me that if I bore you a son, you would ensure his nobility. What is this I hear about your wife telling her sons not to play with my son?" Lian Kong, the Minister of Punishment, responded with a loud, mocking laugh. Man-sik's mother wondered what could be so amusing, but before she could fully process it, Kong retorted, "Do you think that because you bore me a son, my blood would erase your low birth from him? Leave me at once.
I'm expecting guests."
Man-sik heard everything but couldn't fully grasp what had just transpired. He hid from his mother's view until she returned to her chamber, where she wept. Man-sik thought that if his brothers were avoiding him, he could still be friends with their friends. However, he noticed that they also withdrew from him. Believing he had somehow offended them, he asked his father to help him reconcile with his brothers. His father replied, "Don't bother to beg. One day, you'll understand why they did what they did, and you'll appreciate them for it." As a small boy, Man-sik yearned for a friend to play with, so he tried to befriend one of his father's slave sons. To his surprise, the boy told him he couldn't be his friend because Man-sik was of noble birth. When his father caught them talking, he warned Man-sik never to befriend slaves, as they would lose respect for him. At 7 years old, unable to befriend the nobles because he wasn't fully noble and unable to befriend those of low birth because he wasn't fully of low birth either, Man-sik withdrew into himself. He began studying harder than before and grew closer to Min-ju, the teacher his father had hired for him and his brothers. Min-ju noticed that Man-sik had become unusually quiet, unlike the talkative boy he had known. Although Min-ju had an idea of what might be troubling him, he couldn't understand why Man-sik's own brothers treated him this way. Life continued this way for a while until Man-sik lost his mother 3 days after his 16th birthday. At first, he didn't cry but acknowledged the loss of something irreplaceable. The only person who understood him, listened to him, and advised him. 2 days after her death, he finally tried to eat, having had no appetite since her passing. Seeing the food before him, he remembered how his mother would console him to eat, just as she did when he had malaria. Overwhelmed by grief, he cried the whole night, with no one to console him. He even thought of ending it all. Surprisingly, his father, who had never checked on him except when he was sick, entered his room and consoled him. His father admitted that he too couldn't sleep, as Man-sik's mother was a rare gem. He shared with Man-sik that his mother's dream was for a world where anyone could be anything, regardless of their family background. "This is now your mission," he told Man-sik. "I hope God helps you." Now, Man-sik had found a reason to live, to realize his mother's dream. If he couldn't achieve it himself, he would find someone who could carry it on. The next day, Min-ju came to offer his condolences, and for the first time, they had a long conversation. Min-ju was amazed at Man-sik's wisdom and experience. He spoke like someone aged 60 rather than 16. Min-ju then revealed that Man-sik's father had asked him to help Man-sik achieve his dream, explaining that his father couldn't openly support it due to his position as a minister. Min-ju said, "The first thing you need is to experience love. You need to be among people who will love you for who you are, and if they hate you, it should be for who you are, not because of your background." Man-ju's childhood friend, Kangmi, was a great merchant specializing in buying and selling ginseng. He advised Man Sik to leave Joseon and meet his friend in another country. They would disguise him and pretend he had run away from home, as no one would pay much attention to his absence. That night, they disguised him, and he set off to meet Kongmi. He was warmly received and introduced to other merchants who transported goods. At first, Man Sik struggled with the lifestyle and decided to return to Joseon, but he was caught and handed over to the chief merchant by Kongmi. This way, Man Sik wouldn't have to do much labor and could eat better. Eventually, he decided to open up, make friends, and learn martial arts to defend against bandits during their trips. He needed all the strength he could gather to achieve his goal. Man Sik became loved by everyone because he used his earnings to help others and rarely refused when asked for assistance. He continued living this way until he turned 25. One day, he overheard other merchants discussing the death of a nobleman, not knowing it was his father. They were happy about the death of one of the nobles who had made life difficult for people like them. Man Sik broke down in tears and confronted the gossiping merchants. "What is the difference between you and them if you rejoice over a fellow man's death?" he shouted. The merchants dispersed, murmuring, "What's with him today? It's as if they were family." Man Sik decided to leave the following day, but unfortunately, the chief merchant passed away overnight, preventing his departure. Losing the two father figures in his life within 2 days made it the saddest time of his life. After the burial, it was time to choose a new chief merchant. Man Sik and 3 other men were the people's favorites for the position. When Man Sik heard the rumors, he immediately dismissed them, saying it wasn't the right time to think about leadership. They needed to mourn the former chief merchant. However, the other contestants proceeded with the election, and 2 weeks later, Baek Hyen was voted as the new leader. Baek Hyen soon had problems with Man Sik because many people felt more comfortable seeking advice and help from Man Sik. This bothered Baek Hyen greatly. He called a meeting and accused Man Sik of coveting his position. Man Sik handled the situation calmly, assuring Baek Hyen that he had no such intentions and was even considering moving back to Joseon. He moved back to Joseon after 11 years, now 27 years old. His reputation preceded him, and he soon began doing business with ministers. His free-spirited nature and generosity stood out. Some ministers initially thought he gave them gifts to seek their favor, but after 2 years without asking for anything in return, they started inquiring about his intentions. Man Sik would tell them, "Promise you'll support me when I need help for something very good in the future." Most agreed, while a few insisted on knowing more before offering their support. When the king's coronation was approaching, Man Sik extended his generosity to the royal family by making significant donations. After the coronation, the king summoned him to the palace to express gratitude. Man Sik simply asked the king to promise his support when needed. The king agreed. 6 months after the coronation, he hosted a grand banquet, inviting ministers, the wealthy, merchants, and the poor. As the evening drew to a close, he rose to deliver a speech that would resonate throughout the history of Joseon. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed leaders and fellow citizens, today, we stand in a society divided by the chains of classism. For too long, these shackles have constrained us, dictating our worth and determining our destinies. But I declare to you, no more. In this land where the mighty Han River flows and the mountains touch the sky, we cannot allow the poison of classism to tarnish our greatness. We are all born equal, with the same beating heart, the same curious mind, and the same inherent value. Yet, we have let artificial boundaries separate us, eroding our shared humanity and sowing discord among us. When we allow classism to divide us, we weaken the very foundation of our nation. Let us heed the wisdom of our ancestors, who taught us that harmony and balance are the pillars of a just society. Let us honor their legacy by tearing down the walls that divide us, by recognizing the worth of every individual, and by embracing our diversity as a source of strength. Together, let us forge a new path, one where every citizen has equal opportunity to thrive, contribute, and succeed. A path where our future is not determined by birth, but by the limitless potential within each of us. Let us rise above the petty distinctions of class and unite as one people, with one spirit and one destiny. For only then can we truly fulfill the promise of our great nation. Thank you. He was immediately arrested for causing uproar in the country. The following day, the king decided to hold an open interrogation. As he was brought out, all the merchants and the poor people shouted, a stark contrast to their previous indifference toward the king. During the interrogation, he addressed the ministers, officers, and the king as equals, demanding they fulfill the promises made to him as a man. He declared, "Even if you choose to end my life, let my wish come true." Some ministers supported his plea while others opposed it. The king called for a vote, and those in favor won by a single vote, the vote of the Queen Mother. Although some ministers argued that the Queen Mother only had authority over internal court matters and not political affairs, to everyone's surprise, the king supported her decision. The poor rejoiced as equality between the rich and the poor was finally realized. Since then, there has been equal treatment under the law for both the rich and the poor, recognizing them as valuable assets of the country. The lesson learned from this event is that the voices of all individuals, regardless of their social status, deserve to be heard and respected. It highlights the importance of equality and fairness in society, emphasizing that every person, whether rich or poor, holds inherent value and deserves equal treatment under the law.